Welcome back. Republican Senator Richard Shelby of Alabama has announced he won't be seeking re-election in 2022. Shelby, who is 86 years old, is currently serving his sixth term in the Senate. He was chairman of the Appropriations Committee until Democrats recently took control of the chamber. Shelby's seat is among 20 GOP-held Senate seats that will be contested in the next midterm elections, and he's the fourth Republican senator to announce plans to step down next year, following Senators Rob Portman of Ohio, Richard Burr of North Carolina, and Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania. That Shelby seat is not going to be competitive, but the one in Pennsylvania will be. And joining us now is Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. He announced yesterday that he will be running in 2022 for the Senate seat that Toomey is leaving. Lieutenant Governor, thank you very much for getting up so early with us to talk about this. And I know I want to talk about the Hoagie Wars in Pennsylvania in a second, but let's start with politics, because you have cut an interesting figure for Democrats in the state of Pennsylvania, in some ways looking to some of those voters that perhaps backed Donald Trump in recent presidential elections. So let's start with an issue that's facing the Senate right now, and that's the minimum wage. Bernie Sanders is pushing for them to include a $15 minimum wage in this big coronavirus relief package. But there's some concern it could lead to job losses. Where do you come down on this? Should they raise the minimum wage to $15, even if there's some job loss as a result?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I put out a tweet yesterday, and I think it's up to 125,000 likes. I mean, it went nuts. I mean, it's just like, if you don't support raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, you should live and work for $7.25 an hour so you can demonstrate how you survive, let alone feed a family on that, because it's just a mathematical impossibility. So I don't know why we're pretending that leaving that alone at $7.25 is okay. I mean, it's great to give stimulus checks. People deserve them and they need them during this pandemic. But why not give people a lifeline, out of that kind of below the poverty line deprivation, and give them a baseline of a living wage of $15 an hour? That, to me, would be a hard flex.
Yeah. So the Biden administration also out of the gate pulled out of the Keystone Pipeline project, which, again, is energy related. And obviously, a lot of folks in Western Pennsylvania rely on the energy industry for their jobs, to feed their families. Do you think that was a good call by the Biden team?
I mean, it certainly, I don't think it was one that Joe Biden went into and didn't put a lot of thought into it. And I'm sure he is. I know he's concerned about any of the potential job losses. Out west here, it's definitely a conversation that we've had with respects to the energy sector. And I've always maintained the position of Republicans have to acknowledge the emergency that we have with climate, and that we need to transition away from fossil fuels to green renewable energy. And Democrats, my party, has to acknowledge that there are realities with respects to energy, whether that's how much of our nation's electricity comes from coal and natural gas, and making sure that we safeguard those union jobs and make sure that those industries have a transition towards green energy where job loss is eliminated, or at least at a minimum minimized.
Let's talk briefly about the vaccine rollout in Pennsylvania also. There have been some struggles in the state. Philadelphia in particular has really struggled. What do you think the Wolf administration that you're a part of, the governor in Pennsylvania, what mistakes have been made in the rollout? What needs to be fixed?
Well, I don't necessarily think any mistakes were made with the governor. I can't speak to Philadelphia's situation. I know some local officials picked an operation that turned out not to be what it was. But with respects to the governor, I do know that we have had zero leadership from a federal level for months and months and months, up until only when Joe Biden took office. And when you have a pandemic that's now almost been a year long, and you have 2 weeks of a president who says, hey, it's okay to wear a mask. Hey, this virus we need to take seriously. Republicans wouldn't even wear masks in the Senate chambers in Pennsylvania, and they claimed that they weren't afraid of this virus. So the vaccine rollout was a logistical challenge, and it's ramping up and it's getting going. I know a lot of people that have been successful in getting their vaccination. And I have not, nor would I, until any Pennsylvanian can walk into a Rite Aid and get the shot.
Right. All right. So before I let you go, Wawa, I'm sorry, they have the best hoagies in the state of Pennsylvania. I don't understand how there's even a conversation about Wawa versus Sheetz. I can't.
I've heard you say that. Yeah. A Wawa fan is a Pennsylvania resident who's been unlucky enough to never been to a Sheetz, and I think that's true. And then again, Wawa is great when you're 50 miles or more from a Sheetz. That's always been my philosophy. That's how I bring Pennsylvanians together with that. It's like Sheetz, of course, is better, but if you're 50 miles away from a Sheetz, Wawa is an outstanding option, truly. I've been to many.
I am willing to accept the reverse of that, which is I will go to Sheetz if there is no Wawa available. Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, thank you very much for being here and indulging in a little bit of Pennsylvania fun. Thank you very much. We will be following your campaign.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.